The orange glow against the night sky hit Donovan Rivers like a fist to the chest, and he was already running barefoot across the yard when he realized the roar he heard was not thunder but his barn devouring itself in flame. His horses were screaming inside, high terrified shrieks that tore through the crackle and snap of burning timber, and his legs pumped faster, though he knew with cold certainty he would be too late. The heat met him 20 feet from the doors, a wall that pushed back against his momentum, and he raised an arm to shield his face as he staggered forward. Then a shape moved in his peripheral vision, something large and fast coming from the direction of the Zelnik property line, and before he could process what he was seeing, the figure had reached the barn doors and wrenched them open and plunged straight into the inferno. Green skin, tusks catching the firelight, an orc woman, her dark braids streaming behind her as she vanished into smoke so thick it looked solid. Donovan's heart stopped. His feet did not. He was moving again before thought caught up to instinct, and this time when the heat hit him he did not slow. He pulled his shirt up over his mouth and nose and followed her in. The world became red chaos. Smoke choked him immediately, filled his lungs with poison, and he could not see more than a few feet in any direction. The horses were still screaming, hooves battering against stall doors, and through the roar he heard her voice shouting something he could not make out. He moved toward the sound, one hand trailing along the wall because he could no longer tell which way led out and which led deeper. Heat scorched his skin. His eyes streamed. A beam cracked somewhere overhead and embers rained down, burning through his shirt. Then he saw her. She had reached the stalls and was hauling open the first door, her silhouette massive against the flames eating up the far wall. The horse inside bolted past her, found the open barn doors by pure panicked instinct, and fled. She was already moving to the next stall. Donovan reached her side and grabbed the third door, the metal latch searing his palm, and together they worked down the row. His mare came out wild-eyed and rearing. Her gelding followed, then the 2 work horses he used for the plow. 5 animals, all told, 5 lives that would have burned. The orc woman turned toward the doors and Donovan followed, but something shifted overhead. He looked up and saw the loft giving way, the supports that held the second floor buckling as fire consumed them from within. It was going to come down. It was going to come down right on top of them. He did not think. He threw himself into her from the side, his shoulder hitting her ribs with all his weight behind it, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs as half the barn's upper structure collapsed where she had been standing. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Heat washed over them, and for a moment he was certain they were about to die, pinned beneath burning wood with no way out. Then she was moving, rolling them both sideways, her arms around him, her body shielding his as she dragged them toward cooler air. His back scraped over something sharp. His head spun. He coughed and could not stop coughing. Then they were outside. She had pulled him through the doors and 20 feet beyond, and they collapsed together on the hard-packed dirt of the yard, gasping like landed fish. Donovan's entire body shook. His hands were burned, his lungs screamed, and when he opened his eyes he saw her propped on one elbow beside him, her face streaked with soot, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. Blood ran from a gash on her temple where falling debris had caught her. She was staring at him with an expression he could not read. "You idiot," she rasped, her voice raw from smoke. "You could have died." He tried to answer and coughed instead, a racking spasm that left him dizzy. When he could breathe again he wheezed, "So could you. For horses. Horses are worth dying for. You are too." The words came out without thought, nothing but raw honesty, and he saw her eyes widen fractionally. Then she looked away back toward the barn, which was fully engulfed now. The roof caved in as they watched, sending a column of sparks spiraling into the night sky. The structure would be a total loss. Everything inside, everything he had stored for the winter, all of it was gone, but his horses were alive. They stood in a nervous cluster near the fence line, sides heaving, but alive. And so was she. Donovan pushed himself to sitting and immediately regretted it as the world tilted sideways. The orc woman's hand shot out to steady him, her palm warm against his shoulder, and he leaned into the contact without meaning to. She did not pull away. "Cissy Zelnik," she said after a moment. "Your neighbor." He knew who she was. Everyone in the valley knew the Zelniks, the orc family that had bought the failing homestead 3 miles east 2 years ago, and had been struggling ever since to make something of the barren land. They had been sold. He had seen her from a distance before, working their fields or hauling water from the creek, but they had never spoken. Orcs kept to themselves out here, and humans mostly pretended not to see them. "Donovan Rivers," he managed. "Thank you." She shook her head. "I heard them screaming." "I could not." She trailed off, then gestured at the ruin of his barn. "Lightning." He followed her gaze and realized she was right. The storm that had rolled through earlier, the one that had sent him to bed listening to thunder rumble across the valley, must have struck the barn. No other explanation made sense. The bolt would have hit the roof, set the dry wood alight, and the fire would have spread fast through hay and straw, and 2 years of accumulated dust. An accident. Pure bad luck. No malice, no human neighbor with a grudge against the orc family nearby. Just nature, indifferent and deadly. "Must have been," he said. Cissy looked at him again, and this time her expression was easier to read. She was worried, not for herself but for him. "Can you walk? You need water and those burns need tending." He tried to stand and his legs nearly gave out. She caught him, slinging his arm over her shoulders and taking his weight as though he weighed nothing at all. Her strength was astonishing. She half carried him toward his house, moving carefully across the dark yard, and he was too exhausted to protest. By the time they reached his porch, his vision was graying at the edges. She kicked the door open and maneuvered him inside, lowering him into a chair at his kitchen table with surprising gentleness. Then she was moving around the small space, her eyes sweeping over shelves and cupboards until she found what she needed. A basin, clean cloth, the jar of salve he kept for minor injuries. She worked with quick efficiency, filling the basin from his water pump and returning to his side. When she began cleaning the burns on his hands, he hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. "This will scar," she said, her voice matter of fact. "Rather have scars than be dead." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. "You should not have come in after me. Could not let you face that alone. I am stronger than you, faster, better suited to, did not matter." He met her eyes and held them. "Could not stand there and watch you burn." She went very still. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint crackle of embers outside and the drip of water from the cloth in her hand. Then she bent her head and returned to her work, but he saw color rise in her cheeks, a darker green against her skin. They did not speak again until she had finished bandaging his hands and cleaning the worst of the scrapes on his arms and back. By then, exhaustion was pulling at him like an undertow, and he had to fight to keep his eyes open. Cissy stepped back, surveying her work, then nodded once. "Rest," she said. "I will check on your horses before I go." "You do not have to rest," she repeated, and there was no arguing with that tone. He watched her slip back out into the night, her form silhouetted briefly against the dying glow of the fire, and then he let his head drop to his arms on the table and let the darkness take him. When he woke, the sun was already high, and his entire body felt like one massive bruise. He groaned and pushed himself upright, every muscle protesting, and stumbled to the window. The barn was gone. Nothing remained but a blackened skeleton of support beams and a heap of ash and charred timber. In the daylight, the destruction looked even worse, total and absolute, and for a moment despair threatened to swallow him whole. Then he saw the horses. Someone had moved them into the paddock and left out hay and water. They were grazing peacefully, apparently none the worse for their ordeal. Cissy. It had to have been. He made himself eat something, though his stomach churned, and drank enough water to ease the raw ache in his throat. Then he forced his battered body outside to assess the damage up close. The barn could not be saved. It would have to be torn down completely and rebuilt from scratch, which meant lumber and nails, and time he did not have. The planting season was just ending, and he would need the barn ready again before harvest, or he would have nowhere to store grain, no shelter for the animals when winter came. The thought of the work ahead, the sheer impossible scale of it, made him want to sit down in the ashes and give up. Instead, he began sorting through the wreckage, looking for anything that might be salvaged. A few tools, their handles burned but the metal intact. A length of chain. Not much else. He was still at it when he heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Cissy approaching across the yard. She looked as exhausted as he felt, soot still streaking her face and arms, but she walked with purpose. Behind her came two more orcs, a man and a woman who shared her sharp features and amber eyes. Family, he guessed. They carried tools, shovels, and axes, and a heavy saw. "What are you doing?" Donovan asked, bewildered. "Helping," Cissy said simply. She gestured to her companions. "My brother Cale and my cousin Mara. We clear the ruin first, yes. Then we see what you need." He stared at her. "You do not have to do this. You came into fire," she said, and her voice was soft. "For me, I can swing an axe for you." The argument building in his throat died. He looked at the three orcs standing in his yard, in the harsh light of day where any passing neighbor could see them, offering their labor to a human who had never done a thing to earn it. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won. He could not rebuild alone. He would kill himself trying and still fail. "All right," he said. "Thank you." Cale, a broad-shouldered orc with a scar running through one eyebrow, grunted acknowledgement. Mara, smaller and quicker-looking, flashed him a brief grin that showed her tusks. Then all three set to work without further discussion, moving into the ruins and beginning the hard labor of dismantling what the fire had left behind. Donovan joined them, and for the next several hours they worked in near silence, the only sounds the thud of axes and the crash of weakened beams being pulled down. By midday, they had cleared enough space to see the foundation, which was cracked but might be salvageable. Donovan stood in the center of what had been his barn, wiping sweat from his face, and tried to calculate how much lumber he would need. The numbers made his head hurt. Even if he could afford it, getting the wood here would take weeks. Problem. Cissy had come to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the smoke still clinging to her clothes. "Money," he said bluntly. "Lumber costs. I have some saved, but not enough for this." She frowned, her brow furrowing. "You sell crops, yes, wheat and oats, some barley. But I will not see that income until after harvest, and I need the barn before then." "Trade, then." He looked at her. "Trade what? Your field is good. Rich soil, water nearby. You have much land, more than one man can work." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Our land is poor. We break our backs and grow half what we need. If you let us use part of your field, plant our own crop here, we help you rebuild. Fair trade." Donovan considered that. He did have more land than he could manage alone, particularly now with the barn gone and his workload doubled. Letting the Zelniks use the eastern field would cost him nothing, and if they brought their labor to the rebuilding, it might actually be possible to finish before winter. "What about your family?" he asked. "Will they agree to this?" Cissy's expression went carefully neutral. "I speak for us in this. They will agree." Something in her tone suggested that might not be entirely true, but Donovan did not press. He held out his bandaged hand and she took it, her grip warm and firm. "Deal," he said. They shook on it and the pact was made. Over the next week, the true scope of the work became clear. The barn had been large, built to hold not just animals but equipment and stores, and replacing it would require more than muscle. It would require planning, precision, and coordination. Donovan drew up plans by lamplight, sketching the frame and calculating load-bearing walls. Cissy appeared each morning with her brother and cousin, and sometimes others from her family, and they worked until the sun set. Slowly the ruins were cleared away, the foundation repaired, and the first load of lumber arrived from the mill in town. That delivery caused the first real trouble. The mill owner, a sour-faced man named Grigson, refused to unload when he saw orcs working on the property. He sat on his wagon and glared at Donovan with undisguised contempt. "I do not deliver to orc lovers," Grigson said. Donovan felt his temper flare. "You delivered to me, a human, on my land. Who I hire is none of your concern. It is when decent folk need to know who they are doing business with." Grigson spat over the side of his wagon. "Keep company with greenskins and people start to wonder what side you are on." Kale had gone very still, his hand tightening on the handle of his axe. Mara looked ready to spit fire. But Cissy merely stepped forward, placing herself between Donovan and the wagon, and fixed Grigson with a level stare. "The wood is paid for, yes?" she asked. "That is not the point. Then unload it or give back his money. You do not get to keep both." Grigson's face turned an ugly shade of red. For a moment, Donovan thought the man might actually climb down and start a fight, which would end badly for everyone. Then Grigson made a disgusted noise, hauled on his reins, and backed the wagon up to the work site. He and his boy unloaded the lumber in grim silence, throwing the planks down with unnecessary force, and the moment the last board hit the ground they were gone, the wagon rattling away down the road at speed. "That will cause you problems," Cissy said quietly, watching them go. "Let it." Donovan bent to inspect the lumber, checking for warping. "I am not throwing you off my land because some bigot has an opinion." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded once and turned back to work. They raised the first wall 3 days later. It took all of them, Donovan and the 3 orcs, and 2 more who had come from the Zelnik homestead, lifting the heavy frame and walking it upright while someone braced it from the other side. When the wall stood vertical and secured, locked into place with temporary supports, Donovan felt something ease in his chest. It was real now. The barn would rise again. That night, Cissy stayed after the others left, helping him prepare the evening meal in his small kitchen. It had become a routine over the past days, this quiet domesticity, and Donovan found he looked forward to it. She moved around the space with growing familiarity, knowing where he kept the plates and how he liked his coffee, and they worked together in companionable silence. When they finally sat down to eat, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You are good at this," Cissy said, nodding at the stew he had made. "Learned to cook young. My mother died when I was 12 and my father was not much for kitchen work. He is gone too. 5 years now, left me the land and a pile of debt which I finally paid off last year." Donovan smiled without humor. Burned barn aside, this was supposed to be the year things got easier. Cissy snorted softly. "Life does not work that way." "No, it does not." He studied her across the table, taking in the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair and softened the hard angles of her face. "What about you? How did your family end up here?" Her expression shuddered. "We were driven from our last home. Humans did not want us near their town. We pooled everything we had and bought the land from a man who said it was good for farming." She shook her head. "He lied. The soil is thin and the water table is too deep. We work twice as hard as anyone else and grow half as much. That is why you offered the trade. That is why." She met his eyes. "We are desperate, Donovan. Another year like the last and we will lose everything. This partnership, it keeps us alive." The honesty of it hit him hard. She was trusting him with her family's survival, laying it out plainly, and the weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a yoke. But he found he did not resent it. If anything, he felt honored that she trusted him enough to speak plainly. "Then we make sure the barn is done right," he said. "And we make sure your crop comes in strong, whatever it takes." She smiled, a real smile this time, and it transformed her face entirely. The work continued. Summer settled over the valley, hot and heavy, and the barn rose beam by beam. Donovan learned to read Cissy's moods, the subtle shifts in her expression that signaled tiredness or frustration, or the rare moments of satisfaction when a joint fit perfectly, or a wall went up without trouble. She learned his rhythms too, the way he grew quiet when he was calculating measurements, the jokes he made when the work got too tedious, the particular set of his jaw when his burned hands ached but he refused to stop. They developed a shorthand, a way of working that required few words, and Donovan realized with some surprise that he had never worked so well with anyone. Cale noticed. One afternoon, when Cissy had gone to check on the horses, her brother pulled Donovan aside. "She likes you," Cale said without preamble. Donovan blinked. "We work well together." "More than that." Cale's gaze was uncomfortably direct. "She watches you when she thinks no one is looking. She smiles more than I have seen in years. I am telling you this because you should know, and because if you hurt her, I will break both your legs." Donovan had no idea what to say to that. "I have no intention of hurting her." "Good." Cale clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make him stagger. "Then we will get along fine." That conversation occupied Donovan's thoughts for the rest of the day. He had been carefully not examining his own feelings, too focused on the work and the impossibility of the situation to let himself consider what it meant that he looked forward to seeing Cissy each morning, that her laughter made something warm unfurl in his chest, that he had started imagining a future that included her in it. Orcs and humans did not court. They did not marry. The prejudice ran too deep, the social cost too high. Even here on the frontier, far from the towns and their rigid hierarchies, such a relationship would mark them both as pariahs. But when Cissy returned and grinned at him over the horse she was brushing, her tusks showing and her amber eyes bright with good humor, Donovan found he did not care about any of that. He was halfway in love with her, and the knowledge sat in his chest like a coal, warm and dangerous. The summer progressed, and the barn took shape. The walls were complete, the roof half shingled, and the interior was beginning to look like a functional space again. Donovan allowed himself to hope that they might actually finish before the first frost. Then Cissy came to him one evening with a face like stone. "My father is calling me home," she said without preamble. "He needs help with the harvest on our land. He says I have spent enough time here." Donovan's stomach dropped. "For how long?" he did not say. "But our crops are failing again, and he is angry." Her hands clenched at her sides. "He thinks I have been wasting time, that this work here does not matter because it does not directly feed our family. But the trade, he does not see it that way. He sees his daughter working another man's land while our own withers. Her voice was tight with frustration. I tried to explain. He does not listen. Donovan thought quickly. What if I came with you, talked to him myself? Cissy looked at him as though he had suggested jumping off a cliff. You want to come to my family's home, a human? Why not? We are partners in this. He should hear from both of us how the trade benefits you. He will not welcome you. He may not even let you on the property. Then I will stand at the property line and shout if I have to. Donovan met her eyes. I am not letting you go without a fight. Something shifted in her expression, vulnerability and hope warring together, and she nodded slowly. All right, we go tomorrow. They set out at dawn, walking the 3 miles to the Zelnik homestead in silence. Donovan used the time to prepare his arguments, running through everything he wanted to say. But as they crested the final hill and the Zelnik farm came into view, his carefully planned words evaporated. The place was in worse shape than he had imagined. The fields were brown and struggling, the crops stunted and sparse. The house was a ramshackle structure that looked one strong wind away from collapse, and the barn was barely worthy of the name. 3 orc children played in the dirt yard, their clothes patched and worn, and an older orc woman hung laundry on a line strung between 2 posts. She looked up as they approached, and her face hardened. Cissy, she said, and her tone held both relief and reproach. Your father is in the back field. Thank you, Mama. Cissy glanced at Donovan. Wait here. He waited, acutely aware of the hostile stares from the woman and the curious eyes of the children. After a few minutes, Cissy returned with an older orc man who could only be her father. He was tall and broad, his face lined with years of hard labor, and the look he turned on Donovan was cold enough to freeze blood. You are Rivers, the man said. I am. You must be Mr. Zelnik. I am. My daughter says you have something to say to me. Donovan took a breath and launched into his prepared speech. He explained the trade, the use of his eastern field in exchange for labor on the barn. He outlined how the harvest from that field would belong entirely to the Zelniks, supplementing their own failing crops. He described the work they had accomplished and how much still remained, and how Cissy's contribution had been essential to all of it. He spoke plainly and honestly, holding nothing back, and when he finished he waited for a response. Mr. Zelnik was silent for a long moment. Then he said, My daughter is needed here. I understand that, but the work we are doing benefits your family directly. The crop we plant on my land will not be ready until autumn. We need food now, not promises. Donovan hesitated, then said, What if I advanced you some of my stores? Enough to get you through until harvest. Cissy turned to stare at him. Donovan, you cannot afford, I can manage. It was not entirely true, but he would find a way. Call it part of the trade. Supplies now, labor later. Mr. Zelnik's eyes narrowed. Why would you do that? Because I care about your daughter more than is wise, Donovan thought, but he said, Because we are partners. Partners help each other. The orc man studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he looked at Cissy and something passed between them, some wordless communication. Finally he grunted. 1 month, he said. She comes back for 1 month to help here, then she returns to you, and you provide the supplies you promised. It was not the answer Donovan wanted, but it was better than losing Cissy entirely. Agreed. They shook hands, the orc's grip crushingly strong, and the deal was struck. Donovan loaded a wagon that afternoon with sacks of grain and oats, salt pork and dried beans, more than he could truly spare, but not as much as the Zelniks needed. He delivered it himself, enduring Mr. Zelnik's grudging acceptance and Cissy's mother's tearful gratitude. The children stared at him with wide eyes, and the youngest, a girl no more than 6, shyly offered him a handful of wildflowers. He accepted them gravely and thanked her, and her face lit up. When he finally turned to leave, Cissy walked him back to the wagon. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of it." "Come back when you can," he replied, and could not quite keep the longing from his voice. She looked at him, her amber eyes searching his face, and then without warning she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. It was brief, barely more than a brush of her lips against his skin, but it sent a shock through his entire body. 1 month, she promised, and then she was gone, walking back toward her family's house and leaving him standing alone by his wagon with his heart pounding. The month that followed was the longest of Donovan's life. He worked on the barn alone, making what progress he could, but everything took twice as long without Cissy's help. Cale and Mara came when they could, but their labor was needed on the Zelnik land as well, and Donovan understood. He filled his days with hard work and fell into bed each night exhausted, but sleep brought dreams of amber eyes and a smile that showed tusks. He missed her, desperately, achingly, in a way that made him realize his feelings had gone far beyond the warmth of budding affection. When she finally returned, riding up to his house on a borrowed horse with the sunrise at her back, Donovan thought his heart might crack his ribs trying to escape his chest. He met her in the yard and they stood staring at each other, and then she was laughing and he was grinning like a fool and the world felt right again. "The barn looks good," she said, taking in the progress he had made. "Would look better if you were here to help. Then let us finish it." They returned to work as though the month apart had never happened, falling back into their easy rhythm. But something had changed. There was a new awareness between them, a charge in the air whenever they stood too close or their hands brushed reaching for the same tool. Donovan caught her watching him more than once, her expression soft, and knew she must see the same longing reflected in his face. They did not speak of it, not yet, but it hung between them, a promise and a question all at once. The barn was nearly complete when the second load of lumber arrived, this time brought by a different hauler. The man was civil enough, unloading without complaint, but as he prepared to leave he pulled Donovan aside. "Fair warning," the hauler said in a low voice. "Grigson has been talking in town, says you have gone native, that you are working with orcs and have betrayed your own kind. There are people listening." Donovan felt ice settle in his gut. "Let them listen. I am not doing anything wrong. Maybe not by your reckoning. But folks out here have long memories and short tempers. You watch yourself." The man left, and Donovan stood staring after the wagon, unease prickling at the back of his neck. He knew prejudice ran deep, knew there were people who would hate him simply for treating orcs like the human beings they were, but he had not expected open hostility. Not yet. Cissy found him standing there, his expression grim, and read the situation immediately. What did he say? Donovan told her, leaving nothing out. When he finished she was quiet for a long moment, her jaw tight. "We can stop," she said finally. "If this is going to bring trouble to your door, no." His voice came out sharper than he intended. "No. I am not sending you away because small-minded fools cannot see past their own hate." "Donovan, do you want to leave?" She stared at him. "No, of course not. Then we finish what we started." They returned to work, but the warning sat heavy on Donovan's mind. He found himself watching the road more often, tensing at unexpected sounds, and he knew Cissy noticed. She said nothing, but she stayed closer, and at night when she should have gone home she lingered, finding excuses to remain just a little longer. One evening, as they sat on his porch watching the last light fade from the sky, she finally asked the question he had been dreading. "Do you regret it, helping us?" Donovan turned to look at her. She was staring straight ahead, her profile sharp against the darkening horizon, and her hands were clenched in her lap. "No," he said simply. Not for a moment. Even if it costs you, even then. He hesitated, then reached out and covered one of her hands with his. Her skin was warm, rough with calluses from hard labor, and when she turned her hand to lace her fingers through his, the gesture felt like coming home. I would do it all again, Cissy. The fire, the barn, all of it, because it brought you here. She looked at him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and said, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, stark and vulnerable, and for a heartbeat Donovan could not breathe. Then he was moving, closing the distance between them, and when he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, she melted into him with a soft sound that made his pulse race. The kiss was everything he had imagined and nothing like it. She tasted like summer and smoke, and when her arms came up to wrap around his neck, he pulled her closer, desperate to eliminate every inch of space between them. They broke apart only when air became a necessity, and even then he did not let her go, pressing his forehead to hers and breathing her in. I love you too, he whispered. I think I have since the night you ran into the fire. She laughed, the sound shaky and joyful, and kissed him again. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms, and made quiet plans for a future that felt suddenly, impossibly real. They would finish the barn. They would bring in the harvest from both properties. And then, if she was willing, Donovan wanted to make the arrangement permanent. Merge the two failing homesteads into one strong operation. Build a life together, here on the land that had brought them together. Cissy agreed to all of it, her eyes shining, and Donovan felt a peace settle over him that he had not known since before his father died. The barn was completed in late summer, the final shingles nailed into place under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. They stood back and admired their work, Donovan and Cissy and the handful of orcs who had helped, and Donovan felt pride swell in his chest. It was a good barn, solid and well built, and it had been raised by cooperation and shared labor rather than coin. That felt important somehow. A better foundation than money could buy. We should celebrate, Mara said, grinning. Throw a raising party, invite everyone. Everyone, Donovan asked doubtfully. Both families, Cissy clarified. Yours and mine. Let them see what we built together. It was a risk. Bringing the two groups together, forcing them to interact, could expose all the tensions and prejudices that still simmered beneath the surface. But it could also be an opportunity, a chance to show that cooperation was possible. All right, Donovan agreed. We do it properly. A barn-raising feast. They spent the next week preparing. Cissy's mother, who turned out to be an excellent cook, took charge of the food, directing her daughters and Cissy with brisk efficiency. Donovan cleaned his house and yard, set up tables borrowed from Kale, and tried not to worry about how the gathering would go. He had no human family left, but he invited a few neighbors he was friendly with, men who had helped him in the past and who he hoped would be open-minded enough to share a meal with orcs. 2 accepted. 3 declined, their excuses thin. The day of the feast dawned clear and warm. The Zelniks arrived mid-morning, a procession of orcs carrying dishes and blankets and musical instruments. Donovan's neighbors came around noon, eyeing the orcs warily but civil enough. For the first hour, everyone remained in their separate groups, humans on one side of the yard and orcs on the other, and Donovan began to think the whole thing was a mistake. Then Cissy's youngest sister, the girl who had given Donovan flowers, approached one of the human men and offered him a piece of honeycomb. The man, a gruff old farmer named Torrance, stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, thanked her gravely, and accepted. The girl beamed and ran back to her mother. After that, the ice began to thaw. Food was shared. Stories were exchanged. Kale got into a good-natured argument with Torrance about the best way to plow rocky soil, and Mara challenged one of the other humans to an arm wrestling match that drew a laughing crowd. By evening, people were mingling freely, the divisions forgotten, and when someone pulled out a fiddle and started playing, orcs and humans danced together under the stars. Donovan stood at the edge of the celebration, watching it all with a sense of wonder, and felt Cissy slip her hand into his. "This is good," she said softly. "This is a start," he replied. They danced together, ignoring the few disapproving looks, and Donovan realized he had never been happier. The celebration wound down in the small hours of the morning. People drifted home, full and tired and perhaps a little more open-minded than they had been when they arrived. Donovan's neighbors departed with handshakes and promises to visit again. The Zelniks lingered longer, helping clean up, and Mr. Zelnik pulled Donovan aside before he left. "You are a good man, Rivers," the older orc said, and his voice held none of the hostility from their first meeting. "You have my respect." Coming from him, that felt like a benediction. When everyone had finally gone and the yard was clean, Donovan and Cissy stood together in the shadow of the new barn. It rose behind them, solid and strong, a monument to everything they had built together. "What happens now?" Cissy asked. Donovan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Now we make it official, merge the properties. Your family moves here, or we expand, or we build something new entirely. Whatever works, but we do it together. You are sure this will not be easy. People will talk. Let them." He squeezed her hands gently. "I am done caring what small-minded people think. I love you, Cissy. I want a life with you. Everything else is just noise." She smiled, her tusks showing, and said, "Then we do it. We build something new." They sealed it with a kiss, and the pact was made. The following months were a flurry of activity. The Zelniks began the process of selling their failing land, which took time but eventually found a buyer. In the meantime, they split their labor between both properties, ensuring the harvests came in on both sides. Donovan's eastern field, enriched by the Zelniks' care and knowledge, yielded twice what he had expected. The shared harvest was enough to see both families through the winter with stores to spare. As autumn turned toward winter, they began planning the expansion. The Zelnik house was too far gone to save, but the lumber could be salvaged and used to build an addition onto Donovan's home. They would need more space if two families were going to share the land, and Donovan found he looked forward to the noise and chaos of a full house after years of living alone. The first snow fell on the day they broke ground for the addition. Cissy stood beside him, watching her younger siblings play in the snow, and said, "This is really happening. Did you doubt it?" "Sometimes." She glanced at him, her expression serious. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to come and tell us this is not allowed." "No one gets to tell us how to live." Donovan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "This is our land, our choice. They will have to accept it." Not everyone did. Grigson refused to do business with Donovan again, and a few other townspeople followed suit. But others, seeing the success of the merged operation and the undeniable fact that the arrangement worked, slowly came around. Torrance became a regular visitor, often bringing his grandchildren to play with the Zelnik children. Other neighbors began stopping by, curious and cautiously friendly. It was not universal acceptance, but it was progress. Winter passed quietly. The families settled into new rhythms, learning to navigate the close quarters and the inevitable tensions that came with so many people under one roof. There were disagreements, of course. Mr. Zelnik and Donovan clashed more than once over how to manage the spring planting, and Cissy's mother had strong opinions about how Donovan organized his kitchen. But they worked through each conflict, finding compromises. And by the time spring arrived, they felt less like two families sharing space and more like a single, blended unit. On a warm day in early spring, when the snow had melted and the first green shoots were pushing through the soil, Donovan took Cissy out to the eastern field. They stood looking over the land they had planted together the year before, now ready for a new season, and Donovan pulled a small carved box from his pocket. "I am not good at speeches," he said, his heart pounding. "But I know what I want, and I know it is you. Will you marry me, Cissy?" He opened the box to reveal a simple band, made of silver and engraved with a pattern of intertwining vines. Cissy stared at it, her eyes wide, and then she was nodding and crying and throwing her arms around him all at once. "Yes," she said fiercely. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and behind them the field stretched out in all directions, full of promise. They married in midsummer, in a ceremony held in the shadow of the barn they had built together. It was a small gathering, just family and the few friends who had proven themselves allies. Torrance stood as Donovan's witness. Cale stood as Cissy's. A traveling priest, one of the few who would perform a human-orc marriage, spoke the words that bound them together. When it was done, and they kissed as husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers. The feast that followed was even larger than the barn-raising celebration. And this time, there was no division between orc and human. People mingled freely, sharing food and drink and joy, and Donovan thought that maybe, just maybe, they were building something that would last. Not just a marriage or a partnership, but a community that could see past old prejudices to the people underneath. As the sun set and the dancing began, Mr. Zelnik approached Donovan with a cup of ale. "You have done well, son," the older orc said, and the word son sent a warm rush of belonging through Donovan's chest. "You have made my daughter happy. She makes me happy too. Good. That is all a father can ask." Mr. Zelnik raised his cup. "To family." "To family," Donovan echoed, and they drank together. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to share a life completely, to navigate the daily intimacies and irritations, took patience from both of them. But they had built a barn together from ash and ruin. A marriage was just another kind of construction, and they approached it with the same determination and care. Cissy took over management of the livestock, her skill with animals surpassing Donovan's easily. He focused on the crops and the long-term planning, where his head for numbers served them well. Together they expanded the operation, adding new fields and investing in better equipment. The farm prospered in a way Donovan's father's struggling homestead never had, and he knew it was because of Cissy, because of her family's labor and knowledge, and the way she pushed him to think bigger. 2 years after the wedding, Cissy told him she was pregnant. Donovan felt terror and joy in equal measure. He knew nothing about being a father, had no good example to draw from, and the idea of being responsible for a tiny life filled him with dread. But when he looked at Cissy, her hand resting on her still flat stomach and her eyes shining, he knew they would figure it out together. Their son was born in early spring, squalling and healthy and perfect. They named him Finn, after Donovan's grandfather, and he had his mother's amber eyes and his father's dark hair. Holding the baby for the first time, feeling the weight of him and the trust implicit in that tiny form, Donovan understood what his father must have felt, the desperate love and the determination to do better. Finn grew quickly, surrounded by cousins and aunts and uncles and 2 adoring parents. The farm continued to prosper, and the community around them slowly, grudgingly, began to accept that the human-orc family was there to stay. Children who had grown up playing together, human and orc side by side, did not see the divisions their parents had. That gave Donovan hope for the future. When Finn was 2, Cissy became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter. They named her Brenna, and she had her mother's green skin and her father's stubborn chin. She and Finn were inseparable from the moment she could crawl, and the house rang with their laughter and arguments in equal measure. The years rolled on, marked by harvests and winters and the slow expansion of the farm. They built a second barn, larger than the first, and added on to the house again when it became clear the growing family needed even more space. Mr. Zelnik, growing older but no less sharp, took on the role of manager, overseeing the day-to-day operations and training the younger generation. Cissy's mother became the heart of the household, her kitchen always full of good food, and her lap always available for grandchildren. Donovan and Cissy settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. They still worked side by side most days, their partnership as strong as it had been when they raised the first barn. They argued sometimes, over money or decisions or the thousand small things couples argue about, but they always came back to the core truth that had brought them together in the first place. They were a team. They were stronger together than apart. One evening, years after the fire that had started it all, Donovan and Cissy stood on the porch of their home and looked out over the land. The original barn, the one they had built from the ashes, stood silhouetted against the sunset. Beyond it stretched fields green with growing crops, pastures full of healthy livestock, and in the distance the new barn rose like a cathedral. "You ever think about that night?" Cissy asked, leaning into his side. "The fire." "Sometimes." Donovan wrapped an arm around her. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I would lose everything. Instead, you gained everything, because you were brave enough to run into the flames," she smiled. "And you were fool enough to run in after me. Best decision I ever made." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Finn and Brenna were playing in the yard with their cousins, their shouts of laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside the house, Donovan could hear Cissy's mother singing as she prepared dinner and the low rumble of Mr. Zelnik's voice telling a story. The air smelled of growing things and cook fires and home. "Thank you," Cissy said suddenly. Donovan looked at her. "For what?" "For seeing me. For running into the fire, for choosing this even when it was hard." She turned to face him fully, her amber eyes serious. "You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You gave me one too." He cupped her face in his hands, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. "I love you, Cissy. Every day more than the last." "I love you too," she whispered and kissed him. Behind them the house glowed with lamplight, full of family and warmth and the life they had built together. Ahead of them stretched years of harvests and challenges and joy, the future unknown but faced together. And between them stood the barn, solid and strong, a reminder that even the worst destruction could be overcome. That from ash and ruin, something beautiful could grow. They had charged into fire for each other once, and they would do it again without hesitation. That was what love meant. That was what partnership meant. And as the stars began to appear overhead and their children's laughter filled the air, Donovan knew with absolute certainty that he had found his place in the world, here on this land, with this woman. In this life they had built from nothing but courage and stubborn determination, and the kind of love that could weather any storm. The barn stood behind them, a monument to that truth, and it would stand for generations to come.